Look at your primary storage drive. Right now, you probably have space for maybe 3 or 4 modern AAA games before the red bar of death appears. We went from floppy disks holding 1.4 megabytes to CDROMs holding 700 megabytes to Blu-ray discs holding 50 gigabytes. But today, a modern installation of a major multiplayer shooter easily pushes past 200 gigabytes. That is a sheer scale multiplier that breaks the human brain. Why? Your first instinct might be that modern games are just incredibly complex software, packed with millions of lines of intricate programming. But code is essentially just text, takes up practically no space at all. You could fit the entire source code of a massive open-world RPG onto a cheap USB thumb drive from a decade ago. Therefore, to understand this massive inflation in file size, we must look under the hood of modern game engines. It is not merely a matter of more code, but rather an exponential increase in asset fidelity. Let us break down the anatomy of a typical 100 gigabyte installation. If we open the root directory of a modern PC game, what actually eats all of that solid-state storage? It is not the game logic. It is the visual and auditory data required to simulate reality. Let us start with the absolute worst offender, textures and geometry. Back in the early 3D era of the original PlayStation, a texture was a single, flat, low-resolution image stretched over a blocky, low-poly count model. It was tiny, but today, we demand photorealism. When a developer wants to put a simple brick wall into a game today, they do not just paint a flat image. They use photogrammetry, literally taking thousands of high-resolution laser scans of real-world objects to recreate them in digital space. And to make that brick wall react realistically to sunlight, flashlights, and shadows, it requires a physically based rendering pipeline, or PBR. That single brick wall now requires an albedo map for base color, a normal map for simulated depth, a roughness map for light reflection, an ambient occlusion map for microshadows, and a displacement map for actual geometric shifting. One brick wall now requires 5 massive, discrete 4K textures. Therefore, the push for pure visual fidelity multiplies your game storage size exponentially. And unfortunately, it gets dramatically worse. Think about how your graphics card renders objects at different viewing distances. If you are looking at a mountain that is 2 miles away in the game world, rendering a massive 4K asset for that mountain would waste enormous GPU processing power. So, game engines use a technique called Mipmapping. This means the developers must include the ultra-high-resolution 4K texture, and a 2K version, and a 1080p version, all the way down to a tiny, highly pixelated square. Every single object in the game world has multiple copies of its textures saved directly to your hard drive to ensure smooth rendering at any distance. On top of that, think about the lighting. In older games, shadows were simple dark circles. Today, calculating ray-traced global illumination in real time is incredibly demanding. To save your graphics card from catching fire, developers compute complex lighting scenarios on massive server farms during development and save those light calculations as massive image files. What was once generated procedurally on the fly must now be pre-baked into massive gigabyte-scale files. Pre-baked lighting, pre-compiled shader cache files, pre-rendered volumetric fog data, all sitting entirely static on your SSD, waiting to be read into system memory. Now, let us examine the audio architecture shift. In the 16-bit era, sound was generated by a dedicated synthesizer chip reading tiny MIDI instruction files. The console literally performed the music in real time based on sheet music written in basic code. But modern AAA titles demand absolute cinematic realism. We are no longer sending bleeps to a sound chip. We are playing back Hollywood-grade acoustic recordings. In the era of 4K texture mapping and lossless spatial audio, a single gunshot in a modern shooter is never just one simple sound file. It is a heavily layered composite. You have the mechanical click of the trigger, the explosive pop of the powder, the low-frequency bass punch, the environmental echo calculating the exact size of the digital room, and the metallic clink of the shell casing hitting a concrete floor. That is 5 distinct, high-fidelity audio streams for a single bullet. And to achieve perfect 7.1 surround sound, these audio files are often left entirely uncompressed. Take a second and guess, why? Why would highly intelligent software engineers leave audio completely uncompressed when compressed formats exist to save space? It all comes down to processing limits. If a game has 100 enemies shooting, shouting, and exploding simultaneously, forcing your computer to decode 100 highly compressed audio files in real time would absolutely crush your CPU. Therefore, developers leave the audio uncompressed. Yes, uncompressed audio takes up 10 times the physical storage space, but it costs absolutely 0 CPU cycles to playback. Add in fully voiced dialogue. Modern games feature massive scripts with thousands of spoken lines. Publishers want to sell their games globally, so those thousands of lines are recorded in English, and Spanish, and French, and German, and Japanese. Because lip-syncing animations are often tied directly to the audio waveform, developers frequently force you to download every single language pack in the base installation. Your audio folder alone can easily balloon past 30 gigabytes. This brings us directly to the ultimate engineering conflict. The trade-off between aggressive compression algorithms and CPU performance overhead is a constant balancing act. You might naturally ask, why not just compress everything on the disk like a massive zip file and unpack it while playing? We actually used to do exactly that. During the PlayStation 4 and Xbox One generation, mechanical hard drives were terribly slow. They had spinning platters that physically limited how fast data could move. Game data absolutely had to be compressed just to fit through the incredibly narrow bandwidth of a spinning disk. But when that tightly compressed data reached the motherboard, the CPU had to work frantically to decompress it before the graphics card could actually draw the next frame. This severe bottleneck caused annoying micro-stuttering, low frame rates, and the dreaded texture pop-in where buildings would magically appear right in front of your character. Today, the hardware paradigm has completely shifted. We rely on SSD NVMe architecture. These drives connect directly to the motherboard via PCI Express lanes. They are blisteringly fast. They can push gigabytes of data per second directly into the graphics card memory, completely bypassing the CPU using technologies like Microsoft's Direct Storage API. Therefore, developers stopped compressing the data as heavily. They realized a fundamental truth of this storage evolution. Storage space is incredibly cheap, but CPU time is intensely expensive. By leaving textures, 3D meshes, and uncompressed audio relatively untouched on your ultra-fast drive, the system can stream massive assets instantly into the game world without ever bottlenecking the processor. We literally traded our hard drive space for pure, unadulterated frame rate performance. So, where does this leave us as consumers? We started by wondering why our hard drives are constantly in the red. We discovered that modern game size is not a result of lazy coding. It is the mandatory price we pay for absolute realism and fluid frame rates. High-fidelity assets, complex PBR materials, massive multi-language audio banks, and the absolute necessity to bypass the CPU entirely, all of these factors combine to create the modern 200 gigabyte software Leviathan. We are rapidly reaching a physical limit of what consumers can reasonably download and store. But the industry is already adapting to this crisis. Technologies like Unreal Engine 5's nanite virtualized geometry allow developers to use film-quality assets without generating massive storage-heavy mipmaps. Hardware-level decompression blocks are being built directly into modern GPUs, meaning developers might soon be able to heavily compress files again without taxing the central processor. We might even see a massive return to procedural generation, using artificial intelligence to generate textures on the fly rather than storing them on a disk. Until those technologies become the absolute standard, every time you see a razor-sharp 4K texture or hear perfectly positioned spatial audio without a single dropped frame, you will know exactly why it demands so much space. It is the raw, uncompressed reality of modern digital engineering.